There is truly so much that could be achieved if more Americans would follow MyPlate, or really what it represents, the dietary guidelines. We know from the Healthy Eating Index, which is actually a measure of how well we eat toward the dietary guidelines, that very few Americans actually hit that level of eating appropriately. I believe it's like 50-some%. So we have a long ways to go.
10 years ago, the USDA updated the federal nutrition symbol to become MyPlate, a simple graphic that serves as a general healthy eating guide on what and how much to eat from each of the 5 food groups: fruits, vegetables, grains, protein foods, and dairy or fortified soy alternatives. On today's Sound Living, putting the MyPlate recommendations into practice. Sound Living is a weekly public affairs program produced by Research and Extension at Kansas State University. I'm Jeff Wichman. K-State Research and Extension Nutrition Specialist Sandy Procter says MyPlate serves as a visual reminder that we need to eat a variety of foods from each of the 5 food groups. Sandy, MyPlate is turning 10, and we were talking earlier about the fact that it replaced MyPyramid, and that was all part of kind of a restructuring.
It really was a big change, and it's hard to believe that it was 10 years ago. But as colorful and, I guess, ubiquitous as the pyramid was, everybody sort of recognized it and sort of knew what it was about. It was really confusing. So 10 years ago, when the dietary guidelines changed at that time, shortly after that came the icon that is used to represent those dietary guidelines. It had been MyPyramid in the past, and out they came with this new icon, MyPlate. And I know that nutritionists aren't the center of the universe, but it caused a really big stir in the teaching and the nutrition world, because it really changed the approach that we used with individuals and groups that were learning about eating healthier, and it has continued to evolve.
One of the real benefits is the fact that we have a little bit better idea now of portion size.
It talks real specifically about the plate that they recommend using is, I believe, a 7 to 9 inch plate, not what I call the charger plates that go underneath the dinner, and they're huge. You can find those too. But the size of plate is specified, and then the proportion of food groups on that plate is very clearly laid out and talked about why it's important, why there are more vegetables than fruits, and why there are more fruit and vegetables than grains and protein. And so that balance, in addition to the portion sizes that are outlined because of that plate size, really help us, if we pay attention, to really eat not only a variety that's healthy, but the amounts that are going to keep our weight in control.
The plate itself is fruits, vegetables, grains, and protein, and then we have dairy just kind of off to the side like a saucer.
Right. Well, we know that most of us don't eat the main proportion of our dairy, that we drink it, and so that's a glass off to the side. But it can be other foods besides that, and so there is flexibility within every group. And in this last round of dietary guidelines, we know that dairy now includes fortified soy alternatives. So there really are increasing flexibility in each of the groups and an encouragement from the dietary guidelines themselves to look at this plate through the lens of the culture and the ethnicity and the diet plans that are most familiar and most like what we as a blend of Americans are used to.
The fruits and vegetables really making up half the plate now.
At least. And that fits with the often repeated same thing, eat more fruits and vegetables. Well, that shows up on the plate. And not only does that show up on the plate, but in the dietary guidelines, it gets real specific, talking about, the brighter the colors and the more mix of variety that you can have in those groups, the healthier it's going to be.
The variety is really being pushed. That's one thing I've noticed even in their graphics and everything else. They're talking about vary the fruits, vary the vegetables.
And vary the protein comes through all the time. And we talk about, limiting the amount of maybe animal protein and increasing plant-based foods. And all of that is because the types and the variety of nutrients that we get are so wide. And we're just really understanding with the whole biome and digestive system that is just really being explored. We really are understanding that some of these foods have amazing properties by themselves, or in conjunction with other foods, and it certainly isn't anything we can do with dietary supplements. It needs to be whole foods, the less processed, the better, and that variety of mixing those assures us that we're getting a wide variety of nutrients and protective factors.
Fresh is nice when you can get it, but it's not mandatory.
And that's a message that also needs to get out. It isn't always the most nutritious form. And you think about fresh, how could anything be better than fresh? Well, fresh, if you think about it, may sit in the store for a while, or fresh may sit at the producers and then move to market and so not be as fresh when it gets there. Not saying that it has lost its quality, but it may have lost some of its nutrition at its peak. But we know that foods that are processed for frozen without sugar added or salt added or other, creams or fats, some of those things, and foods that are canned are at the peak of freshness. And so they really do have a very solid nutritional benefit that we can take advantage of. And they certainly give us a wider number of choices when that growing season may be limited for whatever reason.
We often think of protein as being some sort of a meat or fish, but it doesn't have to be. There's nuts, there's other types of beans that we can throw in.
And those are increasingly seen as extremely important to our health. They have fiber. They have a variety of protein and protective factors in their chemical makeups that can give us a lot of benefits in addition to the protein that we need for the repair of our cells and all the body processes that make protein so important. But yes, even just varying the protein, whether we choose red meat occasionally, poultry or seafood, or those plant-based protein sources. And like you said, there's beans, legumes, there's seeds, there's nuts, there's all types of foods that count as protein sources. And we really benefit from checking out what those can be and how we can work a wider variety into our diets.
I mentioned like steak and things like that, and the size of that, I think, keeps getting smaller. We don't need nearly as much of the meat protein as we think.
It does have some very valuable nutrients. We know that when it comes to B12 and when it comes to iron, that maybe red meat might be, just really best for that. But the size and the amount that we need to have for good health is not large, and it can be as part of a mixed dish where we include other ingredients. It can be on occasion. We don't need those sources of some of those nutrients every single day. And we get some of those, maybe not quite as concentrated of source as red meat, but we get some of those in other foods all the time. And so knowing that some of our main sources of things that maybe aren't as healthy, like saturated fats, come from some of those animal sources. Some of those plant-based sources and other varying sources of protein can give us a real nice variety and really help us take our health angle into real clear focus.
We've talked in the past about the fact that some foods just seem to make you feel full faster or longer. And I find that with any type of beans. If I have a bowl of chili, for instance, I'm good for a long time.
I think, that has a lot to do with, we talk about fiber and both the beans in the chili. And another one that does that, I think, is oatmeal. Such a good source of fiber. And so having those foods can really help us if we're interested in watching our weight or just simply trying to not snack between meals and really sort of space our calories so that we don't overeat through the day, which happens to a lot of us, especially in this past year. We've been able to just sort of continuously graze, and it is catching up with many of us.
Grains also on the MyPlate, and as part of that, we often think of bread, but grains go far beyond bread.
Oh, yes. They certainly are one of the mainstays in most people's diets, and it varies worldwide. But in those grains, we still encourage people to make most of their choices whole grain. And so when we think grains, let's think instead of a white pasta, let's think of a whole grain pasta and making routinely a whole grain bread choice. Rice can be whole grain in addition. We can have some of those less processed grains throughout our diet and really make some of those smarter choices that are going to give us that fiber and allow us to be fuller and still have some of those properties and qualities that we really love about grain-based foods.
One of the things I see on the cooking shows is that they talk about couscous and quinoa. What about quinoa?
Well, quinoa is a really interesting food. It's been a staple in Middle Eastern diets, I think, for centuries. It's just really becoming very popular in our part of the world. But quinoa is really interesting. It's actually a seed. We treat it like a grain, and it fits in that group very nicely. But it kind of reveals itself to us as a seed because it is really high in protein. And so it's an amazing plant-based food that kind of takes on the properties of whatever it's fixed with. So you can use it like you might use rice or a noodle. You can use it in salads. It just has a lot of nice properties. It's easy to cook. It's easy to store. There's several varieties. It's got this amazing amount of protein in it, and so it's very cost-effective for people who are looking for a healthy, inexpensive diet.
We can't forget dairy. There's a number of dairy products that we can eat that are very healthy.
Oh, absolutely. And in the dietary guidelines, they really encourage us to look at sources of particularly fat-free and low-fat dairy. And those are both emphasized in the Mediterranean diet plan, which is a very healthy eating plan, and also the DASH diets. So we know that we can have a real healthy diet and include dairy products. And quite frankly, the research on the fat in dairy products is still going on. It's still very interesting. It's kind of like, is that a healthy fat or is it not so healthy? And really, I think the jury is still out on that. There are some very interesting health properties around the fat in dairy. So it certainly isn't something to be completely avoided. And dairy itself has so many healthy properties and nutrients that really are much easier to get from that food group than any others.
Another option for people as part of the MyPlate is to make their own personalized MyPlate plan, and there's a lot of things that they can do online, a lot of apps that they can take advantage of. So this is really something that has become more interactive. It's not just a graphic anymore.
There has been so much work done on the support pieces that go along with MyPlate, and I think that's really one of the shining stars of the whole idea of MyPlate. Is it started off with just the simple icon, and then gradually there were more and more pieces that support it. And then now, just recently with the latest edition of the dietary guidelines, it was still MyPlate as the representative icon, but the pieces that have come out to support it continue to roll out, and they are extremely friendly. There are apps that appeal to different age groups. There are videos. There are all kinds of lesson plans laid out for both young groups and adults. And there just really are a number of pieces. And the one you mentioned particularly, that getting to know yourself through MyPlate, it really has got some real benefits. You can sit in there, type in your details, your name, your age, your height, your weight, and it will work with you on letting you know how many calories you need and then what that looks like in the food choices that you make. And you can track your eating and see how well you do compared to MyPlate and the dietary guidelines.
It is, as designed, a healthy plan if followed.
It is. It is. There is truly so much that could be achieved if more Americans would follow MyPlate, or really what it represents, the dietary guidelines. We know from the Healthy Eating Index, which is actually a measure of how well we eat toward the dietary guidelines, that very few Americans actually hit that level of eating appropriately. I believe it's like 50-some%. So we have a long ways to go. Some age groups actually do a better job with eating closer to MyPlate design than others. And we know that, for example, young children very early in life may do better, eat better and closer to MyPlate. And historically, seniors have done better eating closer to MyPlate. However, as those of us baby boomers are aging and we're bringing our pizza and our lattes along with us, it appears that senior demographic may be inching downward in its adherence to MyPlate. So even though there are groups of us that have made progress, I think it's a constant goal for us to all to work to eat a little more closely to the guidance.
That's K-State Research and Extension Nutrition Specialist Sandy Procter. To learn more about the MyPlate recommendations, visit myplate.gov. Extension also has a number of health and nutrition publications online at ksre.ksu.edu or at local county and district extension offices. Sound Living is a weekly public affairs program produced by Research and Extension at Kansas State University. I'm Jeff Wichman, and this is the K-State Radio Network.